The conference room was cold, the air thick with 5 years of unspoken hatred. My ex-wife, Sarah, sat across the polished mahogany table, her face a mask of practiced victimhood. Next to her was her new husband, Alex, the man she'd told me was just a friend. Flanking them were my own mother and my brother, David, their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt, all directed at me. They had come as Sarah's moral support, a united front to pressure me into signing away more of my money. "It's for Maya's college fund, Mark," Sarah said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "You're doing so well now. It's the least you can do after what you put us through." My mother nodded eagerly. "Your father and I agree. Sarah has been a saint, raising that child while you abandoned your family. David has had to help support her because you wouldn't." I just stared at them, my face unreadable. I let the silence hang in the air, letting their accusations echo off the walls. For 5 years this had been the narrative. I was the villain, the cold-hearted workaholic who destroyed his marriage out of selfishness. I was the one who drove the perfect Sarah into the arms of another man. They had smeared my name to every friend, every family member, turning me into a pariah. They thought this meeting was just another shakedown, another chance to twist the knife. They were wrong. Slowly, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small black USB drive. I slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of Sarah. She looked at it, confused. They didn't realize that this meeting wasn't about money. It was about the truth. "What's this?" Sarah asked, her voice losing its gentle tone. "That," I said, my voice calm and steady, "is my answer." They thought my success was their new piggy bank. They had no idea that their greed was the final piece of a trap I had set 5 years ago. You might wonder why I waited so long, why I endured the lies and the isolation for half a decade. To understand that, you have to understand how they tried to bury me, and how I learned that the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about waiting for the perfect moment to make your enemies destroy themselves. To understand what was on that drive, you have to go back to the beginning, back to a time when I believed I had it all. When I met Sarah, it felt like I was finally stepping out of the shadow my family had cast over me my entire life. I wasn't Mark, the reliable but boring son. I was just Mark, and she seemed to love me for it. Our first few years of marriage were, I thought, perfect. We bought a small house, I was starting to climb the ladder at my engineering firm, and we had our daughter Maya. I finally had a family that felt like my own. The problem was, you can't ever truly escape your roots. My family dynamic was set in stone from childhood. My older brother David was the golden child. He was charismatic, impulsive, and effortlessly charming. My mother adored him. His smallest accomplishments were celebrated with fanfare, while his failures were brushed aside as charming quirks. I, on the other hand, was the fixer, the responsible one. I was praised for my stability, but only when it served them. When I put a $10,000 down payment on my parents' new car, my mother thanked me with a polite nod. A week later, David bought them a $300 espresso machine, and she posted a gushing tribute on social media about his generosity, complete with a dozen photos. That was the pattern. I was the foundation, taken for granted and expected to be there. David was the decoration, admired and fussed over. At first, Sarah was my defender. She would roll her eyes with me after a phone call with my mother. She'd say, "They don't appreciate you, but I do." But over time, something shifted. The united front of us against them began to crack. She started spending more time with my mother, going on shopping trips I wasn't invited to. She began siding with David in small arguments. "Oh, come on, Mark," she'd say. "That's just how he is. Don't make it a big deal." The phrase "don't make it a big deal" became her new mantra, used whenever I felt slighted or ignored. I thought she was just trying to keep the peace. I didn't realize she was being recruited to the other side. The recruitment became a full-blown alliance the year David decided he was going to be an entrepreneur. He had a brilliant idea for a custom sneaker flipping business and needed $20,000 for startup capital. Naturally, the family looked to me. My mother framed it as a family investment and a chance for me to finally support my brother's dreams. Sarah agreed. "It'll be good for us, Mark," she'd urged. "When David makes it big, he'll pay us back double." I knew it was a bad idea, but the pressure from all three of them was immense. So I took the money from our savings and gave it to him. 6 months later, the business was bankrupt and the $20,000 was gone. When I gently asked David about a repayment plan, my mother called me furious. "How dare you put that kind of stress on him?" she shrieked. "He's been through enough." When I told Sarah what happened, she just sighed. "She's right, you know, he feels terrible. You need to be the bigger person." I wasn't his brother, I was his personal bank, and my wife was now his loan officer, forgiving debts on my behalf. It was around that time that Alex started coming around more. Alex was David's best friend from college, a smooth talker with a predatory smile I never trusted. Since David was depressed over his business failure, Alex was at our house constantly, supposedly to cheer him up. But he spent most of his time talking to Sarah. They'd laugh at inside jokes while I sat on the couch, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Then came the whispers and the secrets. Sarah, who once left her phone lying around for days, now guarded it like a state secret. She started going to a new yoga class, one Alex had recommended, and would come home late, smelling of wine, not sweat. When I asked who she went with, it was always a vague, "Oh, just some girls from the class." Her credit card statements showed dinners and drinks at places I knew she didn't go to with my mother. When I brought it up, the gaslighting was immediate and brutal. "My God, Mark, are you tracking me now? You're becoming so controlling. It's like I can't breathe." My breaking point wasn't a shouting match. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. Sarah told me she was taking my mother to a doctor's appointment and then to dinner to cheer her up. A few hours later, I called my mum's landline to ask about a piece of mail, and my father answered. He said my mother had been home all evening watching television with him. The lie was so simple, so pointless, that it broke through all my denial. The gaslighting had worked for a while, making me question my own perception. But this was different. This was a clear, verifiable falsehood. That night, after she came home reeking of expensive perfume and told me a detailed story about the doctor's visit, I waited for her to fall asleep. My hands weren't shaking with anger, but with a strange, icy calm. I remembered we had a shared family cloud account for backing up our phone photos, something we'd set up years ago, and she'd clearly forgotten about. I was an engineer. I lived in a world of data and systems. And data doesn't lie. I logged in. It was all there. A hidden folder, password protected with the name of the dog she had as a child. Inside were hundreds of photos and videos. Sarah and Alex in hotel rooms. Sarah and Alex on a work trip to the coast I had paid for. Sarah and Alex kissing at a restaurant on a night she told me she was working late. The sickness in my stomach was profound, but it was what I found next that truly broke me. The message logs. The affair was one thing, a common sordid betrayal. The conspiracy was another. There were long message threads between Sarah and my brother, David. "Mark's getting suspicious," she wrote in one. David replied, "Just tell him he's being paranoid. Mum will back you up. He's so wrapped up in being the good son, he'll believe it." Another from Sarah, "I feel a little bad. He works so hard." David's response was instant and brutal. "He's a walking ATM, Sarah. That's his purpose. Just play the part until we can get you set up properly in the divorce. Make sure he feels like it's his fault." Sitting there in the glow of the monitor, I didn't feel rage. I felt nothing at all. It was the calm of a man who had just watched his own house burn down to the foundation. I didn't scream or break things. I quietly downloaded every photo, every video, every single message log. I encrypted the files and saved them onto a new high-security USB drive. I knew then that I couldn't just confront them. They were a team. They had a script, and they would shred me. A simple divorce wasn't enough. No, for this level of betrayal, justice had to be methodical. It had to be absolute, and it would have to wait. My discovery changed me. The warmth I had for Sarah was gone, replaced by a glacial calm. I went to work, I came home, I played with Maya, but I was a shell. I was no longer the attentive husband trying to figure out what was wrong. I was an observer, a data collector, watching the subjects of my experiment. They sensed the shift. My lack of emotional reaction unnerved them. They were used to me being earnest and trying to fix things. My silence was a variable they hadn't accounted for, and it made them panic. So, just as David had coached her, Sarah went on the offensive. She staged a massive fight one night, accusing me of having an affair. The projection was so audacious it was almost brilliant. "You're so distant, Mark. You're cold. Who is she?" she screamed, tears streaming down her face in a performance worthy of an award. 2 days later, my mother and David sat me down for an intervention. "We know you've been unhappy," my mother started, her voice full of false sympathy. "But to cheat on a woman like Sarah, we are so disappointed in you," David chimed in, putting a protective arm around an imaginary Sarah. "She's devastated, man. You broke her heart. You destroyed your family." I just sat there and let them talk. I didn't defend myself. I didn't deny their accusations. My silence was my greatest weapon, and they completely misinterpreted it as guilt. They thought they had me cornered. In the divorce mediation, I agreed to everything. She wanted the house. Fine. She wanted a punitive alimony payment on top of generous child support. Done. She wanted to paint me as the villain to all our mutual friends. I let her. I watched her lawyer's jaw tighten, knowing his client was getting away with murder. I saw the triumphant smirk Sarah exchanged with my brother, who had come along for support. They thought they were taking me to the cleaners. They thought they were punishing me. What they didn't know was that I was buying my freedom. Every dollar I gave her, every asset I signed away, was another brick in the foundation of her future prison. They were celebrating their victory, blind to the fact that I was the one who had just set the terms of the war. They walked out of that office as victors. I walked out as a ghost, free to disappear and plan my return. The first year was hell. I moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment across town that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The generous alimony I was paying Sarah, combined with starting over, left me with barely enough to live on. The loneliness was a physical weight. Friends I'd had for a decade now crossed the street to avoid me, their minds poisoned by the lies Sarah and my family had so skillfully spread. For months, I just existed. I worked, ate, slept, and stared at the ceiling, the scenes from that cloud account playing on a loop in my head. But one day, the grief curdled into something else. Resolve. They thought they had buried me. They were wrong. They had only planted a seed. I decided that my revenge wouldn't be an angry phone call or a bitter lawsuit. It would be my success. I would build a life so magnificent that their petty victory would look like a joke in comparison. I quit my job, packed my few belongings, and moved 3 states away to a tech hub where no one knew my name. I cut off all contact with my family. My father tried calling a few times, leaving weak, pleading voicemails, but I never answered. His silence when it mattered had cost him his son. I took all the frustration, all the betrayal, and poured it into my work. In my old job, I had identified a massive inefficiency in logistics management for large-scale engineering projects. I spent 18 hours a day in my new, slightly less cramped apartment, designing a software platform to solve it. Every Sunday, I allowed myself one ritual of self-torture. I would look at their social media. I saw Sarah and Alex get married. I saw them take a honeymoon to Italy, paid for with my money. I saw photos of my daughter, Maya, on Alex's shoulders at the park, with a caption from Sarah. "Finally, a complete family with a real man." My own mother would comment, "So proud of you for finding true happiness, sweetheart." And my brother would post clapping emojis. They were flaunting their crime. Each post was a new log on the fire of my motivation. While they partied, I built my empire on a foundation of coffee and code. For 4 years, I was a ghost. Then, last year, it happened. A major corporation acquired the license for my software in a multi-million-dollar deal. Overnight, I went from a struggling nobody to a name in my industry, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that the clock had just started ticking for them. The 5-year wait was almost over. My new life was quiet and orderly. My company was growing, my finances were secure, and my peace was absolute. But the USB drive sat in a safe in my office, a patient promise waiting to be fulfilled. It was time. The first step was to let the animals know there was fresh meat in the forest. I arranged for my university's alumni magazine to do a feature on my company's success. It was a glossy 2-page spread with a headline, "Local alum transforms industry, secures 8-figure deal." I knew my mother read every issue, cover to cover, to see which of her friends' children were succeeding so she could compare them to David. It took less than a week. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, said nothing, and waited. "Mark, honey, it's your mother." Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone I hadn't heard since I was a child. She talked about how she'd missed me, how she'd seen the article and was so incredibly proud. She didn't mention the 5 years of silence, the slander, or the betrayal. It was a masterclass in denial. Then, after 10 minutes of fake pleasantries, she got to the point. "You know, honey, Sarah is struggling so much. It's so hard being a single mum, and Alex, well, his business isn't doing so well. They could really use some help." A few days later, Sarah called me directly. Her tone was a carefully crafted blend of humility and entitlement. She gushed about my success, and then pivoted to our daughter. "Maya is so brilliant, Mark. She deserves the best, and I want to send her to a top-tier private university. With your new situation, I thought it was only fair to renegotiate the child support to include a full college endowment." "I see," I said, my voice perfectly neutral. "I thought we could discuss it, maybe with my lawyer, to make it all official," she added, believing she was cornering me. "An excellent idea," I replied. "Why don't you have your lawyer set it up? And Sarah," I added, delivering the final piece of bait, "feel free to bring my mother and David. After all, they're family. They should be there for this important discussion about Maya's future." She readily agreed, ecstatic that I was being so compliant. And so we arrived at that cold mahogany table. They saw a guilty man, finally ready to pay his dues. I saw a cage, a trap 5 years in the making, and 4 people who were about to walk right into it. "It's an archive," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I'm a man who believes in keeping meticulous records." I nodded to the mediator, a neutral party hired for the meeting. "If you could please plug that into the conference monitor, I've labeled the primary folder Maya's College Fund." The mediator, intrigued, did as I asked. A moment later, the large screen on the wall flickered to life. The first image appeared, a crystal-clear photo of Sarah and Alex kissing on a hotel balcony, a sunset behind them. A photo from the work trip I had paid for. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alex's face went rigid. My mother and David just looked confused. Then the next photo appeared. And the next. Sarah and Alex having dinner. Sarah and Alex holding hands. A short video clip played of them laughing and clinking wine glasses. "What is this, Mark? Some kind of sick joke?" David blurted out, trying to sound indignant, but his voice trembled. "I'm just getting to the relevant parts," I replied coolly. I used a small remote to navigate to the next folder. This is a series of messages. I believe you're a participant in this conversation, David. The screen filled with the blue and grey bubbles of a text log. It was the conversation between him and Sarah. I let them read it in silence for a moment before I read the most pertinent lines aloud, my voice even and devoid of emotion. David's advice to my wife: he's a walking ATM, Sarah. That's his purpose. Just play the part until we can get you set up properly in the divorce. Alex stared at Sarah, his face a mask of fury. He wasn't just married to a cheater. He was married to a con artist. I continued, looking directly at my mother. And this one is my personal favourite. Mark's getting suspicious. David's reply: just tell him he's being paranoid. Mum will back you up. My mother's face went completely white. She looked from the screen to me, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. The entire narrative, the carefully constructed lie they had lived for 5 years, had just been publicly executed. Sarah started sobbing, a raw, ugly sound that had none of the performance of her previous tears. David looked like a cornered animal. The air crackled with the sound of their world collapsing. They were no longer the arbiters of my life. They were just defendants in the trial I had prepared for them, and I was the judge, jury, and executioner. The silence in the room was finally broken by Alex. He stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He didn't look at me. He looked at Sarah. His face a canvas of pure disgust. "You used his money to be with me?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Our entire life is a lie." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the room without a second glance, the door clicking shut behind him, sealing Sarah's fate. Sarah's hysterical sobs turned to venomous rage, all directed at me. "You monster!" she shrieked. "You did this to ruin me, to ruin our family." I ignored her. I looked at the mediator, then at the 3 people who had tried to destroy me. "First," I began, my voice steady, "my lawyer will be filing a suit to reclaim every cent of alimony paid on the grounds of fraudulent inducement. This evidence is more than sufficient." I glanced at David. "Second, the $20,000 investment is now a formal loan. My attorney will be in touch about a repayment schedule with 5 years of accrued interest." David's face was ashen. "Third," I said, my gaze falling on my mother, "I have made 2 copies of this drive. One will be sent to my father, so he finally knows the truth of the woman he's married to. The other is for David's fiancée and her family. I think they have a right to know the character of the man she's marrying." This was the final blow. My mother let out a strangled gasp, finally understanding the totality of her ruin. "As for Maya's college fund," I said, my voice softening for the first and only time, "you will never have to worry about it. Because 5 years ago, I set up an irrevocable trust in her name. It's now worth more than you could have ever hoped to demand from me today. You will never see a dime of it. I will manage her future, her education, and her well-being from now on, free from your poison." I stood up and slid my chair back under the table. I looked at their broken, terrified faces one last time. There was no triumph in me, only a vast, quiet emptiness where the pain used to be. I hadn't just gotten revenge. I had performed a necessary surgery, cutting the cancer out of my life. "This meeting is over," I said, and walked out of the room, leaving them to suffocate in the truth. In the months that followed, their world imploded exactly as I planned. Alex divorced Sarah immediately. My lawsuit was successful, and she had to sell the house to pay me back. David's fiancée left him the day her father saw the evidence. My father left my mother and has since started to build a tentative, fragile relationship with me and his granddaughter. I am no longer a ghost or a scapegoat or an ATM. I am just a father to my daughter, the CEO of my company, and the architect of my own life. I am free.